Let's Get To presents
5, 4, 3, 2, 1.
Go, go, Astros! Here come the Astros, burning with desire. Here come the Astros, breathing orange fire. Here come the Astros, with winning on their mind. Here come the Astros, #1 every time. Go, go, Astros!
We want Houston!
For the second time in 6 years, the Astros are baseball's best.
And now, Go Let's Get To presents, dedicated to the two-time world champs from H-Town, brought to you by three guys who've been here since Art Howe had hair. And welcome back to Let's Get To. Nope, this is not Let's Get To. God, it's been a long week.
Let's Get To Network.
We are, yeah. And welcome back to Go Astros. We are 10 days away from pitchers and catchers reporting to spring training. I actually started this show by calling it Let's Get To, so I apparently also need spring training. But you know who doesn't? Brian Arbor is with us. Brian, how's it going?
So I'm very good. It's a different perspective between the two baseball fans in my house because the moment the World Series ended, I was breaking out the champagne, which you guys saw literally. And my wife looked up how many days until pitchers and catchers report. Regardless, beautiful way to have a relationship. So,
and Andy is back. We are both thawed out. Andy, I see. I guess you guys never really got it down there in Houston like we did you?
Just had drizzle upon drizzle upon drizzle. It was drizzly. I'm excited about the. This is the time of year where we start arguing about the 26th man on the roster. So Ty Buttry's season is on the docket.
Hey, well, Blind Grease or GTFO.
Right. Okay. Well, I do want to start talking a little bit about the GM because we were able to do it, Brian, when you were at the happiest place on earth. First of all, were you there when we recorded or were you working your way back when we recorded?
I was on my way to the airport when y'all recorded. So
to come back to New York.
Yeah.
So you'd already had the magical experience.
I'd already had the magical experience. I'd already gotten to hang out with Mickey Mouse. We'd gotten to see, we went to see the Harmonious, which are ending at Epcot, which is their fireworks and music spectacular. And of course, on Star Wars Rise of the Resistance, I got to meet a whole bunch of Yankee fans.
They are the evil empire, as like they
were able to escape
you met
from
the
them.
Stormtroopers, right?
Yeah.
We were able to escape from them. Thank you.
They do call themselves the evil empire. Well, while you were gone, we did discuss the new GM, and I wanted to give you a second real quick to get your thoughts on the hiring of Dana Brown.
Yeah, I mean, it was an unusual search in that they interviewed three candidates who I would judge to be viable candidates to be a Major League General Manager in 2023, and then they interviewed three candidates who I don't think were. The good news is they picked out of the group of the viable candidates. Dana Brown had, for instance, interviewed for the Tigers job back in, I guess, September or October. When that was open, he's interviewed for general manager jobs before. So in some ways, sort of the worst things we worried about, Brad Ausmus GM, didn't sort of occur. And I think there are scenarios in which they are better off than they were had they stayed with James Click. Those involve Dana Brown being better able to manage the various personalities that have importance within the Astros organization, and to be able to do a better job of being sort of a spokes on the wheel general manager, which is a very different model than what we saw, certainly with Jeff Luhnow, as being sort of the central point of all sort of baseball decisions and baseball operations. Now you have more of a spokes on a wheel model, which is not the way I would do it. Not one that has been as successful as the sort of central general manager, but one in which, I mean, look, Dana Brown talked to Jeff Bagwell and Reggie Jackson as part of the hiring process. And presumably, I don't know if they had veto power, but certainly if they said negative things, I think he'd be less likely to be there. I suspect they like him better than James Click. So that could work out that way. I guess the worrying thing about all of this is I don't think those obstacles are useful or helpful to have so many different power centers that have to be sort of go between. And I guess the best hope would be that Dana Brown is able to be sort of successful enough that those other power centers decline, and he's able to, for instance, sometime this summer, as suggested by Chandler Rome, or in the near future, be able to bring his own assistants who have loyalty to him and not just to James Click, and to have, say, Jeff Bagwell satisfied enough with his job that he declines in importance in making decisions in the organization.
Andy, you've lived with it now for about 10 days overall. Like, where do you see McTaggart said it was a perfect hire? I know McTaggart's job is to be the mouthpiece of the organization, but where do you sit again 10 days or so after the hiring of Dana Brown?
I mean, the proof will be in the pudding. He's a guy who has never held this job before, so I hope that it goes well. As people who sit on the outside of the organization, we run this real dangerous risk of putting too much attention on the process, not enough attention on what the results are, because we can very easily fall into this trap of assuming our assumptions are real, because we sit and we try to read tea leaves, right? So we guess, we prognosticate, we hope, and those things become fact in our minds a lot of times. And what happens then is that if Dana Brown does well, it will be in spite of Jim Crane and Jeff Bagwell and Enos Cabell and Reggie Jackson's meddling. If he does poorly, it'll be because Jim Crane is an ogre and is hard to work for, and nobody wants the job. So they took an also ran that interviewed for 6 other GM jobs, which I think was actually 2 or 3. And nobody else wanted to hire him. And we just took him because he'd be a yes man kind of guy. And the truth probably isn't either in one of those extremes. It's somewhere in the middle. He could be an incredibly competent, wonderful GM, and things could just not work out. That's also,
I mean, that's the thing, right? Sometimes things just don't work out.
So I'm very hopeful because I like the organization that he came through. I think the Braves are one of the organizations that you look at that tend to do more without being one of the teams busting the doors down on payroll. They develop a lot of players from within. That's some of the experience that we need, because regardless of how you view our analytical approach, which we, according to, again, Dana Brown's speeches and what he has had to say so far in the role, we're going to continue to lean heavily on. We do need to figure out a way to develop more minor leaguers and find better players through the draft and through international signings that will replenish what is widely thought of as a bottom third minor league system.
Well, and I want to get Brian's take on this too, but yeah, I mean, the fact is I know Astros fans bristle anytime that were said to be the 26th rank farm club, like, oh, look, and they mentioned the guys of the higher minors, right? Like, or the guys that broke through, like Pena, like Christian Javier. But the fact is we continue to trade away top prospects for guys like Zach Greinke. And then also when you're picking at the bottom of the draft, or you don't get to pick, you're going to see a weaker farm system. And
I think Brian has written about this a number of times. It's not that we're bad at developing. It's just we have a lot fewer bullets to play with. And so we need those bullets to hit a lot more often than a team that drafts at the top of every round. But to this point, we haven't had very successful drafts in a while. We've been very good at hitting on players that we've needed to hit on. Jeremy Pena was not a highly thought of prospect, and we've had a very good result getting him to the major leagues. I hope that trajectory continues for him. But he is an exception to what we've seen for position players for a few years now. Kyle Tucker and Yordan Alvarez were some of the last well thought of position drafted players, and we didn't draft Yordan Alvarez. Christian Javier, Framber Valdez, I've lost the other one. Dancy boy.
Garcia.
Yeah, sorry, Luis Garcia. Those guys were international signings that we did a lot of homework on, but we've lost some of our advantage in those ranks with some moves in our front office, as well as some of the other teams closing the gaps in places that we looked that other teams just weren't investing money on.
Right.
So we've got to get more inventive. We've got to get more creative. We've got to stay out on that. So I'm enthused from Dana Brown in the Dana Brown hire from that perspective, that I think he understands that piece of it. But I'm going to enjoy the focus on replenishing the minor leagues, because for a team to stay in contention, as he said, for 10 to 15 years, that's how you're going to continue to do that without handing out 10-year contracts to guys and hope that nobody ever gets hurt.
Yeah, Brian, I mean, I think that's something that again, you've written about it a bunch. There's a reason why the three of us do this show, because I think we're a bit less knee jerky than everybody else. But yeah, the farm system isn't the best. We've got talent that we've hit on. And we talked about last week about how we've hit on a pretty high percentage, which isn't the norm. At some point that might catch up with you.
Yeah. I mean, I think it goes back to the previous point of will Dana Brown be successful? Well, odds are he won't be as successful as we've seen the last 6 years, which isn't a criticism of Dana Brown. It's mostly that the last 6 years have been remarkable.
Right.
And so I don't think they're going to win 106 games while he's the general manager. That's not necessarily the standard to judge him by. The standard is, do they sort of sustain themselves, which, hey, they have turned over. This is what I wrote about right after the World Series. They turned over a huge part of the roster to a bunch of young players and have hit on a ton of those young players. Not everybody, but, they've hit on, we didn't mention Chas McCormick, a 21st round draft pick who has a 110 OPS plus in the majors. They don't draft 21 rounds anymore.
Yeah.
I'm optimistic on David Hensley. We talked about that last time I was on the show. Last show I was on, again, a late sort of round success in the draft. And again, they've got a couple of young catchers, and I wrote about that this week, who are promising in the future. So it's not like there hasn't been stuff, but I usually say this is numerator or denominator, but Andy, that's a much better analogy. This is why as quantitative guys need to hang out with, non-quantitative guys. They've had a relatively fewer number of bullets in the chamber, but they've hit on a bunch of those bullets. And, you mentioned like the Zach Greinke trade. JB Bukauskas, who we traded away in that deal, got DFA'd earlier this offseason and signed by, I think, the Giants. There's nobody, the one player in that deal we gave up that's worthwhile is Josh Rojas, who we don't need a second baseman or a third baseman. That's part of why we traded him. Right. We then got a second Josh Rojas and Abraham Toro and did the same thing. And hopefully David Hensley is the next in that group, though he has a spot on the roster more than those guys did.
Well, yeah, and I only really brought up that trade just to say that from a raking a farm system, that took some of those players out. But it's like, the thing is, you can't bet on any of that. And I'm excited to see a guy whose expertise seems to be in drafting good players and then getting those players to get extended. Which brings me to, there are three players I think that all three of us want to see extended to some degree: Kyle Tucker, Christian Javier, and Framber Valdez. Brian, I'll start with you. Is Tucker the guy we give that big deal to, that we're maybe thinking to ourselves, I know it's 10 years, 7 years will be good, but we're going to do this anyway? Or do we stick with the way we've been doing it for the last 5 to 6?
I mean, we'll have to see, because the market has shifted, right?
But, a lot. Yeah.
Yeah. But, one thing I'm not worried about as an Astros fan, one thing that I have great confidence in Jim Crane and this front office in, is they're willing to let free agents go. And because of the player development success, because they had Jeremy Pena ready to go to replace Carlos Correa, they could let Carlos Correa go, and they didn't really bid on him either time he was a free agent, because they were able to develop guys like Framber Valdez and Christian Javier. It's not that, they don't miss. It's not that Garrett Cole wouldn't be really hopeful. If you're on Twitter and see every time an Astros fans post when he gives up a home run, you get a biased perspective on how Garrett Cole, who's one of the best one of the 10 best pitchers in baseball still, they could use a guy like that, right? But on the other hand, I didn't mind that watching Framber Valdez win all those games in the World Series. I wasn't pining for Garrett Cole to make an extra start for us. I wasn't, I wonder if Garrett Cole would have gone 7 no-hit innings in Game 4 of the World Series. So, but that speaks to, again, it's connected to the previous point. They have been able to develop players so that the players they have lost in free agency, which is not a small amount of players and not a lot of, it's a lot of good players. They've been able to make up for that. And again, that's why you've got 2 crowns on your banner behind you, James, not just one.
Yeah. Andy, what about you? Just overall, I guess wrapping up this sort of conversation, but also looking at it from the perspective of, I think Tucker's numbers are going to be stupid next year with no shift. Is he the guy that we maybe break the mold on and give that big contract to?
Well, you only have a surplus of starting pitching if you keep that starting pitching, right? So,
yeah,
I would love to lock up Christian Javier and Framber Valdez while they're affordable, and keep those guys long term. Tucker to me is a luxury and not somebody that you want to get rid of, but he has always seemed to me to be a guy that is probably a very unpopular opinion, and our listeners aren't going to love me for this, isn't necessarily bought in with being an Astro. I think there are some guys, Alex Bregman, Lance McCullers. You all love Lance McCullers. He's a guy that 100% loves being in Houston, loves being an Astro, bury him in the H, all that stuff. Sells T-shirts, probably sell hot dogs, will sign things at the shed. Some of you will get that reference. I don't know that Tucker is that guy. I think Tucker is somebody who has wanted to be a free agent, and probably will want to experience that unless you can knock his socks off with a big offer. And that's okay, because my personal philosophy on this is you grow your pitching and you buy your hitting. And
okay.
I think you can do that. And I think you can afford to do that if you have Bregman locked up, if you have Alvarez locked up, if you have a couple of Pena locked up, if you have a couple of other position players locked up. Now, having said that, I'd love all three of them locked up. But I don't know that the Astros can maintain the payroll they want to maintain and do that. Maybe they can. Maybe that's why Dana Brown is here, to figure all that out. They also have looming Alex Bregman, whose contract is up in 2 years after 25. The Jose Altuve question's got to get answered, because that contract is going to come up soon, and he's probably on the Craig Biggio path of, if he wants to be an Astro, he'll be an Astro. It's just a matter of how much he wants to play for, and how much we want to see him get his 3,000th hit in a Houston uniform, if that's what he's going to pursue. So there's some questions about what the roster looks like in the 2025 season. I hope Kyle Tucker's a huge part of that, but those questions have to start getting answered probably this season. So it's an interesting challenge that Brown has in front of him. I think Crane is willing to write those checks. He's just not necessarily shown that he's willing to write them for more than 5 or 6 years, depending what your arbitration status is.
Yeah, and I think obviously I hope it can happen. I feel like losing Tucker will be more like losing Springer than it was losing Correa, if we were to draw the two comparisons.
Yeah.
But I also, again, I still come down to don't want to see the team handicapped with a Bobby Bonilla style deal. Speaking of handcuffing,
I thought you were going to be speaking of Bobby Bonilla.
right.
I would love to have a guy that we just pay $1 million a year. That'd be great. There are no players on our roster we only pay $1 million.
I'd like to note that the Mets got rid of Bobby Bonilla, got several good players in, and went to the World Series that year. So
maybe we should quit dissing the
Bonilla Day when it should be, hey, the Mets got to the World Series Day. It's a good example for people, and a good bit of financial planning by Bonilla's agent.
There you go. But I do want to say, or talk about the fact that it's come out that Dusty is hard pushing to bring Yuli back. And, Yuli, this is where we need to get to the point where, are we going to continue as Astros fans to accept the fact that there's a way they do business, which is, I quote the John Cusack from the movie Grosse Point Blank, with lead pipe cruelty, or are we going to become warm and fuzzy? I think signing Yuli Gurriel at this point is a warm and fuzzy move that doesn't make a whole lot of sense for the team, because it can really only back you up in 2 positions, designated hitter and at first base. Brian, we'll go with you first, since I know, Andy, we talked a little bit about this last week.
Yeah, I agree with that. And notable that your first baseman, Jose Abreu, has a remarkable record of durability. So knock on wood that continues with the Astros, but he's not been, had very few trips to the injured list and has played most every game, to use the baseball expression. He posts. And so the 2 arguments I've seen for Yuli Gurriel are, he'll do better if he gets more rest. Maybe. That's the argument for why he did well in the postseason. My argument for why he did well in the postseason is it's 2 weeks. Baseball,
right?
13 games, and It's great that he had a great third. If he was saving for 13 games, it was a good 13 games. Much better then than in the middle of August. But doesn't mean he's intrinsically better. And then two, because he's a really good guy in the clubhouse. Okay, which may well be true. But one thing I do not worry on a really veteran team with lots of experienced players who have been to more playoff games than anybody in baseball right now. I don't think they need one more guy in the clubhouse to make them feel good or to, call a team meeting. I don't think they lack for those kind of guys. They also don't call out a team meeting because they're all very much we just go about our business and do things and don't panic when we lose a couple games. This is why a lot of them aren't active on Twitter. And so I don't know that this sort of works here. One thing I will note that I think is very important in our evaluation of Yuli, his defensive numbers declined greatly last year. And you can see that very much in his range. He still was really good at scoops. But some of those numbers include scoops, and even with those, it goes down. So if you move to the utility position, maybe he's got to play third base more, or maybe occasionally you want to play him at second. And that seems don't leave him there for very long.
Well, in playing second base in a post-shift world where you can't sort of help cover his spot by moving a shortstop over there from time to time. Andy, I mean, you've had a love, hate, love relationship with Yuli Gurriel through your time since he's been here. Just to me, it feels like too much of, we use a lot of Jerry Jones comparisons before the GM was hired. This feels like a Jerry Jones move of, you were part of the great Cowboys, and so we're going to keep you around because those things will happen again.
I think more importantly, it's the first public show of strength for Dana Brown to do what he needs to do to make a winning team in his mold versus what has been. Dusty Baker is the one pushing right now publicly for Yuli to get signed and privately. Dana Brown is the one going on shows in the Houston market saying, well, hold on, we aren't really weak at the first base or the backup first base position. So let's see where we need to spend our dollars. First great player. I don't know that that's what we need right now. And so for me, that's a lot more interesting power dynamic because Baker fully endorsed Brown's hire, but they don't always have to be on the same page necessarily when it's for the betterment of the team. Dusty Baker, to your point, doesn't need a whoopee on the bench. And that's all Yuli Gurriel would be this year is a feel-good whoopee to, hey, remember when we won the World Series last year? Yeah, he was there. He had big hair, did that thing when he tore his knee up and we won that game. That was great. I just don't see what he brings at this point, and I don't want Jessica mad at me because she gets mad at me every time we have this conversation, although I know she does not watch this show, so I'm okay.
Yeah, that's a whole thing in our marriage, but go ahead.
But Gurriel is 38 years old. He's going to be 39 during the season. He is coming off what should be a fairly minor knee issue. I'm sure he'll be back fully healthy. He is going to need to have DH at bats when he's not playing first base. And he's on a team now that has DH at bats that will be going to Michael Brantley, to Yordan Alvarez, to Jose Abreu sometimes, and potentially to Yainer Diaz if he makes the roster as a backup catcher. So I don't even see where there's DH at bats for him to have. There's just not a fit. I would much rather David Hensley, who can play 3 of the 4 infield positions and a little bit in the outfield in a pinch, than wasting $3 million on Yuli Gurriel so Dusty Baker has somebody that he can kind of talk Spanish to. Dusty Baker does not really speak Spanish.
That's what Bryson is for. They can speak their broken Spanish to each other in both.
Exactly. Things. But I just, for me, it's more about Dana Brown being able to construct the team that he needs to construct as he sees fit versus Dusty Baker feeling okay about having a guy that he had last year on the team.
Well,
and if Jose Abreu gets hurt, guess what? I kind of get the feeling that if Yuli Gurriel is really holding out for $3 million a year, he might still be available.
Well, and I'll just add this to Andy's point here about Dana Brown making the team that he wants. Jim Crane's been in charge of baseball operations from a couple of days after the World Series until last week, and owners are usually the sentimental guys, and usually I want to hire people who will help me sell tickets, which shouldn't be a problem this year, but still it's an argument that make. and his baseball operations department didn't sign Yuli Gurriel, which I took for as much, worry I had about having an owner run, the tradition of owners running baseball operations isn't good, but that was a encouraging decision. Another point to make, though, is we've gotten more indication, including like Chandler Rome had reported, here was last week or the week before, that the coaching staff was pushing to sign Chad Pender, who eventually signed with the Cubs. We've gotten more indication that there is a lack of alignment between the coaching staff, or at least a public lack of alignment between Dusty and the coaching staff and the front office over the last couple of months than we have before. And I don't really know what to make of that other than A, to mention it, and B, kind of hoping that we hear less of that now that there's a general manager, and that hopefully there can be some sort of aligned vision between him and Dusty and the coaching staff.
Well, of course, obviously the real proof will be in the pudding in a couple of years when Dana Brown makes a manager hire, what that will actually look like. Yeah. Andy, I have two more topics to get to you, but your last point on this one.
Sorry, alignment doesn't necessarily mean agreement. Alignment could just be communication and building towards collaboration. So I think it's one thing for Dana Brown and Dusty not to necessarily agree on Yuli Gurriel's status with the team, but if Dana Brown can sell his vision to Dusty, that's good enough. I think where Click failed was, I don't like this, and Dusty said, well, I don't like this, and then they just stopped talking about it. And that's where the division came. You can build the collaboration without necessarily agreeing on every personnel move. So I hope there's growth in that respect.
Well, I want to go to two more topics. The last one being kind of fun, but real quickly, actually was texting this weekend with a friend of the show, Jake Kaplan. He's very excited, by the way, about his Eagles fly, I guess we're supposed to say, or go Birds or some nonsense. And what appeared really more like a Craigslist ad for a student film casting actors, the ad for the Athletic to hire a beat writer for the reigning World Series champions, I guess leaked or came out. And I've actually never seen it this way done from a professional entertainment organization, which is what I'm going to call the New York Times at this point. Andy, I mean, do we have any reason to re-sign up for the Athletic in your opinion, or is this going to just basically be some interns getting a chance to audition for a chance to be the beat writer in New York?
Well, I haven't paid for the Athletic in now 18 months, but they haven't canceled my access, so I still peek in every now and then, which is fine. I do think we were talking about the salary range that they posted, and I did do some research. That is the salary range, or at least the beginning of the range that they, as a policy, post for all of their openings. So I wouldn't read too much into that, although I do believe they will take anybody who's willing to take the job and work for whatever conditions.
My favorite mention was the non-financial benefit, which again screams I'm a senior making my thesis film at UT and I need some actors.
They would love that. They would love somebody right out of J school who doesn't know that they're being treated poorly to take that job and just, this is great. I get to eat whatever they give me in the press box lunchroom. That is fantastic. That's food. It is bizarre to me that Houston is the fourth largest city, I think the 10th or 9th largest media market in the country. They have a full-time football writer. They do not have a full-time basketball writer. At least they didn't for a good part of last year. They do not have a full-time baseball writer and did not for most of last year. And there seemed to be no movement towards that for most of last year. And only last week did they recognize that, hey, maybe we should hire somebody. They had fill-ins. They had the Angels beat writer cover the playoffs for the Astros. They had some senior writers cover random things like winter meetings for the Astros, but there was no acknowledgement that, hey, this was even a problem. And I think it's really the move for the Athletic, which would line up with other things the New York Times does, that if it doesn't happen on the coasts, it doesn't really happen.
Brian?
I go to a synagogue with several New York Times writers, and I'd like to believe that this is my complaints to them paid off.
Okay. All right, Brian, we are 10 days from pitchers and catchers reporting. It's we talk about baseball being this, but despite what Brad Pitt said, this very romantic thing. Your wife was immediately counting down the season the minute Kyle Tucker slid into foul territory and made the catch. What are you excited about? What kind of gets your blood pumping when you think about it?
So since I moved to live with the Yankees, since I moved to a place, and apologies to our Austin-based listeners right now, but since I moved to a place where it was 7 degrees when I got up on Saturday morning and it was not a cause for panic.
It was the ice, guys. It was the. I'm sorry. Go ahead. I have a tree literally ratchet strapped.
I actually took my kid into the city to a concert on
I've
Saturday.
got a limb literally ratchet strapped from falling onto my house right now because they can't get to it. So it was real.
Yes, no, I know it was, and I sent a text to some friends complaining about how cold it was on Friday night, only to get my friend in Austin to note how long he'd been without power. So. In the "Am I the asshole?" question, yes, I was an asshole. Right. But one of the worst part of winter up here is the end of winter, particularly as someone who grew up in the Sun Belt, because by the time I get to March 1st, I'm like, okay, it's done.
Yeah,
it's supposed to be done. We're supposed to be getting into the sunny stuff now. It's supposed to be warm. I can wear my shorts periodically. And I'm not too far away from putting away the long pants for months on end. That doesn't exist up here. One of the things that baseball, okay, and you know what I checked out this weekend? Division III baseball started, and I watched some highlights of my alma mater's walk-off win on Friday.
There you go.
Not this weekend, but the following Friday, college baseball starts, and I will be on my SEC Plus account to watch LSU, ranked number 1 entering the season.
Yeah.
With future number 1 draft pick Dylan Cruz and Tommy Tanks. And then spring training starts. It's all for me a process of, I'm going to get out of this gosh darn winter. I'm going to get out of the cold, and eventually it will be a temperature that humans can live at.
Andy, what about you?
There was actually baseball at Minute Maid Park this past weekend. It was a D3 tournament featuring, I know this is going to shock you, the University of Central Missouri, which is one Jim Crane's alma mater, and where he formerly played baseball. It's, the damn rodent saw his shadow, and I don't know why we continue in 2023 to give any credence to anything that happens in Puxatawney, Pennsylvania, but we do. So evidently we're having 6 more weeks of winter, which means nothing here because the roof is off of my Jeep today, and it's going to be 75. And I'm in a short sleeve shirt, and it's I wore shorts yesterday, and it's wonderful. So I'm ready.
I hate you right now,
and that's warranted. I am the asshole. So I'm ready. I'm ready for baseball. I'm ready to go to Bluebell Park, Olson Field in a few weeks to maybe catch some non-conference action, because Lord knows I can't get tickets for conference games, because why would you build a stadium with more than 5,000 seats when you move to the SEC? That's a whole thing.
They have 12,000 at Alex Box in Baton Rouge, so you can,
short-sighted Bill Byrne. It's a different conversation for a different show.
Yeah.
I'm ready for the Shriners Classic at Minute Maid Park a couple weeks after that. I'm ready for opening day at Minute Maid Park. I'm ready to bitch about spring training games not being on TV, except for the couple that are. And I'm ready to get on the road with Jim and Scott and some other things to see a couple of minor league games. And it's just time. I don't care about the big game that's happening on Sunday. So as soon as that goes away and this farce of a football season it's time for baseball.
I was going to make a joke about Texans fans being super excited on missing on Sean Payton, but we're going to stay positive. For me, it's the same thing you guys talked about. What I love about being a baseball fan is it's always there. When it starts. And for 6 months, you can watch a baseball game at just about any time of day. And I kind of miss that friend. So until next week, we will be back talking a little bit about as we get closer to spring training starting, and then the defense of the World Series championship beginning. Until next time, Go Astros.
Hey, Disneyland was awesome because it was warm, it was fun, and I got to ride lots and lots of roller coasters. Go Astros.
Watch out, Blake Taylor. Ty Buttrey is coming for you. Go Astros.